I was recently reminded of a brain teaser that used to boggle my mind.
Don't just tease my brain, Captain. Really go to town on it.
Yeah.
But when I heard it again, the answer was so obvious to me. It goes like this, or some variation of this. 3 traveling salesmen approach a motel at the same time, and one of them suggests that to save money, they all share a room. They agree to this and go into the office to book their room. The clerk tells them that it will be $30 for the night, so they each pay him $10. The men go to their room, then the manager of the hotel comes out of his office and asks the clerk how much he charged them. The clerk said the standard $30. But the manager gets upset and says, No, there's a special right now that I keep telling you about. The rooms are only $25. So they are owed $5 and change. But on his way to give them the change, he realizes that the math will be hard, and the easiest way to give them the change is he'll just give them each $1 and then he'll pocket the other $2. So each man gets $1 back, meaning that they now have each paid $9 for the room. So in total, they paid $27 for the room. Plus the $2 in the clerk's pocket, meaning they paid $29 for the room. But if the room was originally $30, then where did that other dollar go? What is happening here? How are we missing a dollar? I used to lose sleep over this problem. But this time I heard it, I realized right away that this is just a classic misdirect.
Classic misdirection.
You know, like magicians use, or how cons like the shell game work. It's changing your focus from what is actually happening and making you look at the wrong part of the problem. When you're saying it was $27 that the men paid, plus the $2 in the clerk's pocket, you are made to believe that this amount is supposed to add up to the original price of the room, which it doesn't. But it shouldn't, because it has nothing to do with that $30 anymore. Rather, it has to do with the change that they were owed, which is a different amount. So really what they should be saying is that they paid $27, but the total was $25, so they are now owed $2 in change. That original $30 does not matter at that point. And I wondered why, after hearing it again, I got that so quickly this time. When in my youth, I was so confused. Maybe it's because I did figure out the solution way back when, and I just forgot about it. Or maybe I got smarter over time. Or maybe because of all the Christian arguments I hear all the time, and all the apologetics I have to deal with all the time, I'm way more used to misdirection. Hey everybody, thank you so much for liking and subscribing and commenting and all the other awesome stuff you do, because you're great people and I love you all. I put the links down below for the social media as well as the merch and the Patreon and all the other cool stuff. And if you want, you can go down there, click it. I don't know. I'm just one man. Quite often when I make a video, I'll get comments saying that, well, that still doesn't disprove the existence of God. It could be a video about why I don't think youth pastors should touch kids, or about the dangers of purity culture, or why mission trips are bad. But someone will pop up and say, yeah, well, that still doesn't disprove God.
You can't disprove it.
Like that has anything to do with what we were talking about. I think a lot of this has to do with a misunderstanding of what it is I do here.
What would you say you do here?
A lot of people seem to believe that the entire point of this channel is to debunk Christianity, which is not now and has never been the point of this channel. There are multiple reasons I do what I do. I want to let people know who have left or are thinking about leaving their faith that they are okay, that they aren't bad people for having questions or for no longer believing. I do want to call out harm that churches do and that clergy members do, partially so I can do my part to help stop further pain in the future, but also to let people who have been hurt by churches know that their feelings are valid and that they aren't the only ones. And yes, I do talk about theology sometimes and why the Bible makes no sense, but that is more about helping people with religious trauma. Because when you can step back and look at this theology and look at this religion and see how silly it is after you have been hurt by it, it can help with the healing process. It's like when a kid sees a scary movie and can't sleep, so the parents show them how movies work and show them that that monster was just special effects or just a puppet as a way to help them stop feeling so scared. It's about taking away its power. It's about taking away its hold on us. I understand that some Christians do watch the channel, but I'm not making it for them. I'm okay with Christians watching the channel and wrestling with what I'm saying, but it's not the reason I do it. I'm not a debater. I don't care about owning or pwning. Do people still say pwning? I don't care about owning anyone or burning anyone. And I'm not out here trying to disprove any God. And I would understand if someone pointed out that my video didn't disprove God. If the name of the video or a stated goal of the video was something that implied that that's what was going to happen. But I think the reason for that comment, why people say that still doesn't disprove God, isn't because they thought that that's what I was trying to do, but because it's a classic misdirect.
What do you use for misdirection?
Misdirection?
Yeah, I mean, if you're so good at magic, what do you have them looking at to divert their attention?
It's the same reason they'll say the people that I'm talking about aren't really Christians. It's so that they don't have to address what was actually brought up in the videos. They don't have to engage with the fact that the church continues to hurt people or their theology doesn't hold up to scrutiny.
Douche chill.
But I'll bite. Let's talk about God's existence. And we'll start with this very popular video that has 3 sincere questions for atheists.
First question is, do you believe that God does not exist? So you kind of either have that belief or you don't.
Do I believe that God doesn't exist? I mean, for all intents and purposes, yeah. He probably doesn't exist. There's no reason to believe he exists. I can't say with 100% certainty that God can't exist, but I can't say that about a lot of things. There are a bunch of stuff that could exist, but it doesn't make sense to believe that they do. So practically, I just don't believe they exist, or I don't think about it. So yes, practically no, I don't believe God exists, which is a different statement that I am certain he doesn't exist.
You either believe that God does not exist or you don't. If you answered yes to that, then you're ready for the next question. The next question is, do you believe in evidentialism? Evidentialism is the view that your beliefs ought to be proportioned to the evidence. You shouldn't just believe something without evidence. Those are the first 2 questions.
Yeah, for the most part. I'm sure a few things slip in because my brain no good sometimes, but for the most part, I think you should have evidence before you believe something, but especially before you dedicate your life to something and worship that something, give your money away because of that something, and hate people because of that something.
You answered yes to both of those. If you have the belief that God does not exist, and you also believe in evidentialism, you're ready for the third question. The third question is, what is your evidence that justifies your belief that God does not exist?
If you answer in the affirmative that you don't believe in God, that means that you are making a claim. And that means that you should have to prove that claim. You now have the burden of proof to show that there is no God. But here's the catch. That affirmative statement isn't about whether or not there is a God. The affirmative statement is about what you believe. That's the misdirect here.
Misdirection.
My belief that there is no God is based on the fact that I don't have a good reason to believe there is. The statement, I don't believe in God, can be a factual statement regardless of whether or not there is a God. And the same goes with I believe in God. That can also be a factual statement whether or not there is a God. If you got to the belief that there is a God by faith and without evidence, it doesn't change whether or not that belief is true. I can't say for sure that there can't be a God, but I simply can't believe in something like that without good reasons. There is no good reason based on what we know about the universe to believe there is a God. And even further, there is definitely no good reason to believe in the God of the Bible or any other Abrahamic religion or any other religion in this world.
Is there a God? If not, what are all these churches for? And who is Jesus's dad?
I think it's very important to see that atheism is just as much a knowledge claim as is theism. Theism is the view that there is a God. Atheism is the view there is no God. Both of these make a positive assertion to knowledge, and therefore, if you're to believe either one, you need to have some sort of justification. Atheism is not a default position. If there is a default position, it would just be agnosticism. I don't know whether there is a God or there is not a God. So the atheist does also have a burden of proof.
I don't really care what you call me. I go with the word atheist because I'm not convinced that there is a God, and agnostic makes it seem like there is a chance there is a God that's higher than the chances of a million other scenarios.
So if you can't prove their non-existence, what are we doing here? At best, you'd have to be agnostic or say you don't know if they exist. I would say in many of these cases, what we do know about spaghetti or animals shows certain beings cannot exist or do not exist, like the flying spaghetti monster. But there's nothing we know about God from which we could make a similar claim.
Like, say we are in the dream of a wizard, or we were created last Thursday with false memories of our past. So that term just doesn't feel right for me to use. But again, I don't really care if you want to call me an agnostic. That doesn't change the reality of whether or not there's a God. There are more compelling arguments and science that exists that suggests that we are in a computer simulation than that a God made us, but I don't live my life believing I'm in a computer game.
Now the question is, if it is the case that you can't prove that God does not exist, then you shouldn't be a naturalist. You should be some sort of agnostic or something, but you shouldn't go around saying things like, nature is all there is. There is nothing beyond matter and energy. There is no supernatural reality, because those claims exceed what you yourself say you can prove. So you need to make more modest claims about your position that are more simply agnostic or something, and find a new name rather than naturalism, because that isn't something that you can sustain the burden of proof for.
The goal of science and the goal of naturalism isn't to disprove anything. It simply doesn't accept things as fact without evidence. There could be infinite things outside of this universe. We just don't know what's true or what's not true about what happens outside of this universe. And maybe there are supernatural forces. We just have no reason to believe that, because everything that's been claimed to be because of supernatural forces has been shown to have natural explanations or are shown to be frauds. So it's not that these things can't be, but there just isn't good reason to believe it.
Actually, we can prove negative, unobservable claims. There are no married bachelors, for example. We can also say things like Santa Claus does not exist, because if he did, the world would be different. For example, parents like me wouldn't have to buy presents because if Santa Claus existed, the presents would appear magically under the tree. Since they don't, we know Santa Claus isn't real. And if you wanted to disprove God, you'd have to make a similar kind of argument.
Saying you can prove negative claims at times isn't the same as saying that you have to disprove every possibility or you have to believe it. These people are in a religion. These people have not disproven other religions in order to believe in their religion. I can't disprove that every room in the world has an invisible unicorn in it, but that doesn't mean I should therefore believe that every room in the world has an invisible unicorn in it.
Of course you can prove something does not exist. We can prove, for example, that there are no living Tyrannosaurus rex on the face of the earth.
You can assert that there are no T-Rexes on Earth anymore. And you are probably right. We have no reason to believe there are T-Rexes on Earth. But how are we proving that? What if there were a secret society dedicated to covering it up? What if they were really good at hiding in caves? Now, no, don't get me wrong. There aren't T-Rexes alive today. But the reason we have that belief is because no one has ever seen a T-Rex walking around. Not because we checked every possible hideout. And then there's Bertrand Russell's teapot. That one there. Basically, you can't prove that there isn't a teapot floating somewhere between the Earth and Mars, but that doesn't mean that there is.
That Russell's floating teacup actually exists is irrelevant to the universe. Like I said, his teacup is not an explanation for anything. So one's worldview of the universe is not devoid of explanation if Russell's teacup does not exist. However, if God does not exist, there must be another explanation for the universe and its particular features. And see, now I'm getting to the heart of the issue. It's right here. In contrast to the Christian who proposes the Christian God as the explanation for the universe and its properties, atheists and skeptics who challenge Christians are doing so from the position that something other than the Christian God is the explanation. And they do that because they attempt to disprove Christian arguments and conversations and debates, and because they conduct their lives in a manner as if the Christian God does not exist. That's their position on this issue. So the idea that atheism it's a passive enterprise, there is no claim. We're not making any positive claims here. That's misleading. This is a position that trades on the proposition that reality is explained by other than. Okay, something other than the Christian God.
Yes, there must be another explanation. But just because we may not know what that other explanation is, doesn't mean that your explanation is the correct one. You don't have to have a better reason in order to dismiss a reason given. If I don't understand how evaporation works, and I leave a cup of water out while I go on vacation and come back and the water is gone, if I say that the invisible unicorn is drinking my water and someone says that that is not a good explanation, they don't have to understand evaporation to know that the invisible unicorn explanation isn't a good explanation. I would have to establish the existence of the invisible unicorns in order for that to be a viable reason. You have to establish that your God is the answer with evidence for your God. It's not just the default answer when we don't have an explanation. That's called the God of the gaps, and that doesn't work. You know what I find really funny is how many miracles happened in the Bible and then throughout history, but then once cameras were invented, they stopped happening. Like last year when we talked about the woman whose toes miraculously grew back. But even though she was in a crowd of people, nobody thought to take out their camera and record the thing. Because when anything else big in your life happens, you take photos. Like, for example, a couple years ago, my friend was biking down the street and he went to go pass by a car he thought was an empty car. There were no lights on in the car and the car was not running, but all of a sudden the door of the car opened and my friend hit the door and went flying and got injured. And the first thing my friend did was take a bunch of pictures because he knew he would need evidence. But another thing he did quickly was get representation. And that is something a lot of people recommend. If you ever get seriously hurt or injured, get a lawyer. Who knows? It could be worth millions. And one option is Morgan & Morgan. Morgan & Morgan is America's largest injury law firm with over 1,000 lawyers, 100 offices in all 50 states. They do not settle for lowball offers, and the fee is absolutely free unless you win. And Morgan & Morgan is the official law firm of the UFC. Fighting is in Morgan & Morgan's DNA. Like UFC fighters who fight in the octagon, Morgan & Morgan attorneys bring everything for their clients in courtrooms across America. And Morgan & Morgan has given away 2 tickets to the McGregor and Chandler fight in Las Vegas, Nevada? You can enter for your chance to win at www.morganufc.com. Did you know you could start a claim with America's largest injury law firm with just one click? It's so easy. You can start your claim with Morgan & Morgan by going to forthepeople.com/belief or click the link in the description.
Now, atheists lately have been saying, I just lack a belief in God, so I have no burden of proof. Well, this water bottle lacks a belief in God, but we don't call it an atheist, right?
Then how do you explain holy water?
Yeah. And so what I say to them is, I look at people who are interested in these issues as like detectives. If you're a detective and you're a Christian, and I'm an atheist, and I'm a detective in this scenario, and we come across a dead body, and you say, you look at the clues and you go, I think suspect X is the murderer. And I say to you, Joshua, I lack a belief it's suspect X. You're then going to ask what? Well, who do you think the suspect is? The true murderer. And if I say, well, I don't have to have a suspect, I just lack a belief your guy is the suspect. Am I a good detective?
No, sir.
No, I have a burden of proof too to say I think suspect Y is the murderer. And here's the evidence I have for that.
You don't have to have a default suspect that is guilty until you prove that someone else did it. Real life isn't like Matlock or Perry Mason. You don't have to find the real killer in order to set the accused killer free.
In your struggle with Dr. Westlake, both stethoscopes fell. And in your hurry to leave after you killed him, you picked up the wrong one.
No.
You recognize this stethoscope? This?
Now the truth, Mrs. Balfour. Did you not kill your husband?
Yes.
That is a really up-to-date reference that I have there. Oh, Legally Blonde. They did that on Legally Blonde.
To hide the gun before you got downstairs, which would mean that you would have had to have found Mrs. Wyndham with a gun in her hand to make your story plausible. Isn't that right?
She's my age. Did she tell you that? How would you feel if your father married someone who was your age?
You, however, had time to hide the gun, didn't you, Chutney? After you shot your father.
I didn't mean to shoot him. I thought it was you walking through the door.
Oh, that's 23 years old. Anyways, the cop making the claim that this one person did it has to show that they did it. The prosecutor, if they charge this person, has to show the jury that they did it. At least that's how it's supposed to work.
This verdict is written on a cocktail napkin. And it still says guilty. And guilty is spelled wrong.
You don't pick two suspects and then vote who's most likely to have done it. That's not how you do police work. If a cop goes to arrest someone with no evidence and another cop says, hey, there's no evidence, the reply shouldn't be, well, prove that someone else did it. If there's no evidence, you don't arrest anyone. But what is happening here is because Frank Turek has never had an original thought in his life and has only ever repeated stuff he hears other people say, he got this from J. Warner Wallace, who used to be a cop, and he messed up how it's supposed to work.
Anytime you walk into a crime scene, you're going to see pieces of evidence in the crime scene. I've been in crime scenes with my partners, for example, where I will go in that crime scene and say, wow, given what I see here, I think the best suspect for this is the husband. Oh, my partner could stand next to me and say, well, I disagree. I'm looking at the same pieces of evidence you are, but I think the best explanation is his daughter. Okay. Well, both of us have a burden of proof now. I've got to make a case for why I think the husband did it, and my partner's got to make a case for why he thinks the daughter did it. Something very similar happens when we're trying to describe the universe the way it is.
See, J. Warner Wallace is still wrong here, but at least with the way he framed it, he's given an example where two cops both have suspects and both are trying to claim that their suspect did it, and likening that to both theists and atheists having a claim they must argue for. Turek hears that and says cops have to charge the first person they think might have done it until you can prove someone else did it.
We see the same features of the universe. We see that it has a beginning, that it appears fine-tuned, that life comes into existence from non-life, that the life that does emerge appears to be designed, that there are conscious beings in the universe who seem to be free agents who can make free decisions. We sense these moral obligations in this universe that appear to be objective and transcendent. And we even think there are things that are truly evil. Yet we need to have a standard of good by which we could judge something that's truly evil. These are the features of the universe that both of us have to explain. Both of us have to explain those. Now,
no one has to explain anything. It's nice to have an explanation. It's helpful to have an explanation. It's beneficial to try to find that explanation, but you don't have to have an explanation for everything in your pocket in order to refute someone else's explanation. Science has shown time and time again what the real explanation is for something that used to be explained by God, and Christians either ignore that or make an exception in that case, or explain away the Bible in that case. But then they go and point at something else that science doesn't have an answer for yet and say, there, God did do that though. So even if science never explains everything that there is to explain, that doesn't automatically mean that God is the answer for everything we don't understand. Why is their answer the default answer?
This is science.
But this is a turtle. The world which I have known for 7.5 centuries is a lie.
Even if it's true there's no evidence for God, that doesn't necessarily mean that God doesn't exist.
But it does mean there's no reason to believe it.
You might have heard the saying, absence of evidence is not necessarily evidence of absence. So before we found evidence for the Big Bang, for example, that didn't mean that the Big Bang didn't happen. The fact that we lack evidence really only means that we lack evidence. That's all that it means. So in other words, even if it's true that there's no evidence for God, and I'll talk about that in a moment, it doesn't necessarily follow that we have some kind of argument against God's existence.
Before we had an understanding of the Big Bang, we still studied a universe that was governed by the laws of physics that were the result of the Big Bang. We studied the universe, we studied gravity, we studied the world we live in, and eventually we came to an understanding, by studying that stuff, of Big Bang cosmology. And maybe studying the universe will eventually lead us to a God, but it hasn't yet. So why would we believe in something that we have no good reason to believe in?
But the real issue here, and this is my third point, is that there's plenty of evidence for God. I mean, we don't even have to call it real evidence. We can call it candidate evidence. By candidate evidence, I mean data and phenomena that professional philosophers have argued counts in favor of God's existence. I'll repeat that. By candidate evidence, I mean data and phenomena that professionals have argued counts in favor of God's existence.
True. There actually is evidence for God. I've been slightly misspeaking this whole time, and I will give it to him. There is evidence for God. It's just not good evidence for God.
Do you have any evidence at all?
Well, Your Honor, we've got plenty of hearsay and conjecture. Those are kinds of evidence.
If you submitted a surveillance video that was damaged and blurry, that showed that a human being or perhaps an upright standing bear robbed a convenience store, that is considered evidence. And we can probably use that to establish that the convenience store was robbed. But if you were the defense attorney, you would point out that what is shown in that video could literally be anyone on Earth or any bear on Earth. And there is not sufficient evidence to convict.
I move for a bad court thingy.
You mean a mistrial?
Yeah. That's why you're the judge and I'm the law-talking guy.
The lawyer.
Right.
So yes, there are arguments for the existence of God, and that is a form of evidence. There are ways at looking at nature that people claim as evidence for the existence of God, but the problem is that all these arguments and all this evidence could also be an argument for countless other things, and it's not at all sufficient to conclude that there is a God.
I rest my case.
You rest your case?
What? Oh no, I thought that was just a figure of speech. Case closed.
To say that a scientist can disprove God, Bobby, would be like saying a mechanic can disprove the existence of Henry Ford. A friend of mine is John Lennox. He's a brilliant professor at Oxford University. He's written several books in support of God. And he has an illustration that he gives to his students. He says this: suppose you have a Ford motor car in front of you, like a Model T. He says, what accounts for the Ford motor car? I'll give you two possibilities: Henry Ford or the laws of internal combustion. And the students look at it and go, wait, Dr. Lennox, you need both. You need Henry Ford to create the car, and then you need the laws of internal combustion to allow the car to operate, to work. And he goes, aha, yes, you see it now. Why can't atheists see this point? You can study a Model T and its engine and how it works from now till doomsday. You will never disprove the existence of Henry Ford. And you will never, no matter how much you learn about that engine, get rid of the need for the creator of the engine. And what science does is it tries to discover cause and effect inside the universe. Well, how could science then, if it's trying to discover cause and effect inside the universe, disprove something outside the universe, i.e. God? It can't. That, or atheists are saying that science is all about cause and effect inside the universe. Well, if that's the case, how could science say anything about cause and effect that comes from outside the universe? It can't. If it's dealing with the natural, it can say nothing about the supernatural.
This is the new version of the watchmaker argument, but it's switched to, instead of design being evidence for God, it's saying that you can't disprove God by studying the design. And it kind of shows their hands as if they know that they are losing the argument. Where the watchmaker argument says that studying a design thing proves that there is a designer, but this argument just says that you can't prove that there isn't a designer. And that's a very different thing. It also says that we can't study God because he works outside of the universe. It's shown consistently in the Bible that God exists within the universe and interacts regularly with his creation in this universe. This is simply another misdirect to make excuses for why we can't study his existence.
Classic misdirection.
The Bible says God dwelt among the Israelites. It says that he will live in Jerusalem forever. It says that he lives in heaven and looks down. It says that he lives in the temple. It says that he lives in the Ark of the Covenant. It says that he lives in the tabernacle. It had him living in a dark cloud for a while. It said he lived on a mountain or a rock. The New Testament says that God lives in us, but it never says or implies that God exists outside of the universe.
Just take the human eye. That is clear testimony to the fact of a master creator, a master designer. There is no way that the human eye has evolved and emerged out of nothing or out of mud or out of slime. The perfection with which it functions.
Why do glasses and contact lenses exist? Why do other animals have better eyesight than we do? Why do our brains have to flip the image because the eyes see everything upside down? Why do our eyes seem to be better designed for seeing underwater and our brains have to adjust for that as well?
In the appendix to his book, The Origin of the Species, wrote in there, I must freely confess that to say something even as simple at the time, they didn't even know how complicated the human eye was, but they knew it was complicated. And they said something as simple as complicated as the human eye with its rods and cones and rays and the way that it is able to see and take light and reflect it and project images, to think that that came as a result of time plus nothing plus chance, he says, I freely confess, is absurd to the highest degree. And the eye isn't even the most complicated by a long shot of organs. And that's why we have again and again today, men that just say, hey, if you want to be an evolutionist, you've got to kick against all observable scientific fact. There's not been enough time that has passed in history to explain how mere chance could have got us to this kind of specificity and fine-tuning.
Yes, Darwin was saying that the eyes seem to be designed, but then went on to explain why they are not designed. Because just because something seems to be one way doesn't mean that it is that way. We understand now that the eyes started very basic. Small little bacteria started to be able to sense light versus dark. And the ones that went towards the darkness weren't killed by UV rays and were able to reproduce. Then eventually they adapted to see basic shapes. Go to this blob for food or go away from this blob for safety. That over time went from blurry to more clear as more and more creatures were evolving and the ability to see each other became paramount for survival. And different species adjusted differently dependent on what they needed the eye to do in order for them to survive. A bird of prey needs to see a small mouse from a distance. Nocturnal animals need to see better in the dark. And so on and so on. But yes, I agree, that is mind-blowing to think that this all happened by natural selection over time and that there was no designer. But that is what all the evidence shows. Saying it looks designed, so it must be, doesn't mean we all of a sudden lose all the evidence that it's not designed and all the evidence that we have for how and why it evolved. This isn't even God of the gaps anymore. This is something where there is no gap that we understand that we have an explanation for, and they're still cramming God in as the answer. I remember at one point in elementary school, my teacher corrected someone when they said that a dragonfly resembles a helicopter. She said, no, it's the other way around. The dragonfly has been around far longer than a helicopter has been. If anything, the helicopter resembles the dragonfly. Design gets inspiration from nature all the time. Yes, humans designed airplanes, but the original concepts and designs were created by studying how flight works in birds and bats and insects. But then we turn around and argue that birds fly because they have a designer. We create things based on nature and then look at nature and say it looks like design. We create things out of what we find in the world, never truly creating anything from scratch, and think that that's how a god must have created the universe. We see that nature creates ant colonies, beehives, spider webs, and think we are the only ones on this earth that design, as if we are separated from the animal kingdom, as if what we're designing isn't part of nature. Human design is so new in the grand scheme of the age of the universe, and even the age of the earth. But we think we can compare nature to the little trinkets and stuff that we make and say that nature is designed?
And then you look at the way the universe is finely tuned, that in a way that defies the explanation. Oh, it's just a coincidence. Or it just happened by chance. No, it didn't.
I list some of those things because it's pretty remarkable.
Well, I'll give you a couple that are my favorite. The force of gravity. We all know what that is. You drop something, it's going to hit the floor. But the force of gravity could have been set anywhere along a continuum. If you pictured a ruler across the entire universe, like 20 billion light years, broken down in 1-inch increments. That represents plausibly the range along which the force of gravity could have been set anywhere along that ruler. And yet it's set at the exact right place so that life can exist. What if we changed it? What if we changed the force of gravity 1 inch compared to the 20 billion light year width of the universe? Intelligent life would be impossible anywhere in the universe. That's just one parameter.
Douglas Adams, the creator of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency, and some Doctor Who stuff and some other awesome stuff, once wrote about a puddle. He said, "This is rather as you imagine a puddle, waking up one morning and thinking, this is an interesting world I find myself in. An interesting hole I find myself in. Fits me rather neatly, doesn't it? In fact, it fits me staggeringly well. Must have been made to have me in it." This is such a powerful idea that as the sun rises in the sky and the air heats up, and as gradually the puddle gets smaller and smaller, frantically hanging on to the notion that everything's going to be all right because this world was built to have him in it. So the moment he disappears catches him rather by surprise. I think this may be something we need to be on the watch out for. We evolved and adapted to live on this planet. We didn't exist and then a planet was created around us to hold us. We evolved on this planet. And someday the conditions on this planet will change and will be so bad that we can't survive on it anymore. Like the many great extinction events of our past. Most of the universe isn't inhabitable and would kill us instantly. Most of the Earth, for that matter, isn't inhabitable. There is a reason we sleep inside. There is a reason we wash our hands, why we cook our food, why we invented medicine. Baby humans are useless at survival and have to be protected by other bigger humans. There's nothing finely tuned. It's just that this planet happened to have the building blocks for life and happened to have the exact circumstances that created life, and then life adapted to that.
Stupid babies need the most attention.
Why is it we can do science in the first place? We can do science because we are rational, thinking creatures. But the problem is, if we are just atoms and particles, if there is no God, if all that is going on between my ears right now is a chemical reaction fizzing, why is it that I can even think in the first place? Why is it that I'm conscious? Why do I have a mind?
Science can't disprove God. In fact, science actually can only be done if God exists. Why? Because we have to have an orderly world out there, which seems to reflect the mind of God, these orderly natural laws and natural forces. Secondly, we have to be able to assess and evaluate the natural world. That requires us to have a mind, not just a brain, which is something that atheists deny. They say we're just molecules in motion, we're just moist robots. So in order for us to do science, atheism can't be true. In fact, theism makes science possible. Atheism, materialistic atheism, makes science impossible. So ironically, if we can do science, atheism's false.
We don't have the scientific method because our brains were designed to understand the world around us, but rather the opposite. It's because we like quick answers to explain things. Because we like to say that we have thunder because there's a thunder god, or the reason my son is sick is because of demons, or signing up for an MLM will fix my financial situation. The human mind likes quick fixes and likes to have an answer and doesn't always care whether that answer is the right answer. So we developed the scientific method to counter that. It's why we work together. It's why we build off other people's research and understanding, because we know that our minds aren't good enough on our own to figure everything out.
He's just curious. That's all. He's got this almost scientific mind with the thirst for knowledge. He's like this little Einstein. Some people ask, why? Luke asks, why not?
I ask why a lot.
To help young people recognize that we have a faith that is not based on make-believe, wishful thinking, legend, or that kind of thing, but it's built on a solid foundation of historical and scientific truth. That is what this book is about.
How about make-believe land? There's anything you want.
Stanley, please, this is serious.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Hebrew Bible, written millennia ago, knew there was a beginning. It was in the early 60s before scientists caught up with that. and the Bible was right. And Dawkins said, well, there was a 50-50 chance when I debated him.
Yes, every religion has a creation myth. Yours has a talking animal and forbidden fruit, though. Not to mention that there are other creation stories in the Bible, and some of them have God fighting a chaos monster, which I don't see in Big Bang cosmology, but I'm actually not a science expert.
So when you started studying this, what happened?
Well, when I realized that the evidence was heavily favoring the Big Bang, I said that means the universe has a beginning. If the universe has a beginning, there must be a cosmic beginner.
Why does it have to be a beginner? Just because we don't know what it is doesn't mean we just put a who in there to answer it.
I want to find that cosmic beginner. I had no idea where to look. I mean, I wasn't raised in a Christian home.
Yeah.
There weren't Christians in our neighborhood.
Yeah.
They're hard to find in Canada.
Yeah.
So,
as somebody who lives in Canada currently, grew up in Canada, and has lived in multiple places in Canada, I can assure you that churches are not hard to come by in Canada, and it is not hard to find a Christian in Canada.
So first, whatever begins to exist has a cause. Second, the universe began to exist. Virtually every scientist today concedes that. And that leads to the natural conclusion. If whatever begins to exist has a cause, we know the universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe must have a cause behind it. Now, what kind of a cause can bring a universe into existence? Well, it must be transcendent because he exists apart from creation. He must be immaterial or spirit because he existed before the physical world existed. He must be timeless or eternal because he existed before physical time came into being. He must be powerful given the immense energy of the creation event. He must be incredibly smart given the precision of the creation event. He must be personal because he had to make the decision to create. He must be caring or loving because he so carefully crafted a habitat for all of us to flourish in. And then finally, the scientific principle of Occam's razor tells us there would be just one creator. So what have we got?
That is the worst use of Occam's razor that I've ever heard in my life. Yes, part of what Occam said was that plurality should not be posited without necessity. But that doesn't mean that if you could choose between multiple gods or one god, you choose the one god. Because to sum up everything he said, it usually gets boiled down to the simplest explanation is usually the most correct explanation. The example most commonly given to explain this is if you are in North America and you hear hooves, assume horses, not zebras. Of course, this doesn't always work.
I was like, so I found the missing zebras, like they're in my yard.
It's the call you don't expect to make on a rainy Sunday, but it's one Whitney Bloomquist says she won't soon forget.
I mean, this is Washington. Washington alone would I have thought like zebras are on the loose in Washington, but let alone North Bend.
Imagine you're at Sunday brunch at a restaurant, and then you look out the window and you see this. It's what happened in Washington State. A bunch of zebras just grazing in the grass near a freeway, on-ramp. Customers rushed out to get a glimpse.
So then everybody just kind of at the same time and then all saw the zebras on the road. I've only ever seen them in a zoo, so that was a first.
It was breakfast and a show. Police say the zebras escaped after a driver failed to secure a trailer that they were in.
But most of the time, not always, it's the simplest explanation. Nothing about what Lee is saying is the simplest explanation for how a universe came into being.
Transcendent, spirit, eternal, powerful, smart, personal, caring, unique. That's a pretty good description of the God of the Bible.
Yeah, because you crammed it all in there.
Is the least scientific test that anyone's ever done in history. No offense.
If this was a movie, you'd get killed first, Bob.
Wait, what?
Yeah, skeptical guy. For your own good, you should hang back.
Into the universe, or cosmos, we notice a relationship between all in the created order. There are patterns that develop, motion is visible, and contingencies that arise. What this argument proposes is that if there is anything that is now that wasn't before, there must be something that caused it. For an example, we can look to St. Thomas Aquinas' second proof, referred to as the proof of first cause or efficient cause. We know that if something, A, exists, it did not create itself, but was created by something else, B. If B doesn't exist, then A cannot exist either. But this also applies to B, meaning that there must be a cause C for B and a cause D for C, and so on. To repeat this process infinitely would not make any sense, for there must be a first cause. And the only way for this to be true is if there is a being that is causality itself, existing outside of time and space in pure actuality. In other words, God.
You think there needs to be a first cause because all we know is cause and effect. But there is so little we know about how the Big Bang occurred that saying it has to have a causer and then stretching that to say that that causer has to be a being, has to be a god, is as scientifically sound as saying the reason we have thunder is because of Thor. Just because it made sense when they didn't understand how thunder worked doesn't mean it was true. It's a seat filler until we get the right answer. And even if we never find the right answer, it doesn't mean that the seat filler is the correct answer by default.
Notice about the Bible is that it stood alone in making the claim that space and time are created entities. What I saw in the Eastern religions, space and time are eternal, and God or gods create within space and time that always exists. So seeing that the Bible said something different that was being affirmed by the space-time theorems, said maybe this book really is from the one who created the universe.
So the Bible doesn't say God created time. It has him at the beginning of time, but says nothing about him creating time. But Greek mythology has Kronos, the god of time. The Lakota nation have Itu, the god of time. Hinduism has Kala and Kali. So not only is he wrong that the Bible has God creating time and space, but if it did, it definitely isn't the only religion that does.
Of the type of candidate evidence I'm talking about. The first one is the universe itself. There's got to be some reason why our universe has billions of galaxies instead of billions of slimy triangles. And you can't actually use the universe itself to explain this. That'd be like explaining the existence of a chicken in terms of the chicken. I mean, that's circular. So the question we face then is, well, what type of thing could create the entire universe? God could.
Could is not the same as did.
And some philosophers are actually arguing right now, in fact, I interviewed one recently for our podcast, is that only a being like God, in other words, a perfect being, only that kind of being would be a sufficient explanation for the entire universe.
And saying that the world needed a God, therefore God exists, is the same as your chicken circle. You have to first establish that there is a God. Because otherwise you could just say it was anything, like say a giant universe burping monster. That still answers the same question and with the same amount of evidence.
Old and new will say something like, well, where's your evidence for God? If you imagine God as one more big contingent thing among others, well then there's no evidence for that reality. They're operating out of a scientific framework. But see, if you're looking for God that way, you'll never find him. That's not what he is. God is the sheer act of existence itself, in and through which all particular things exist. But people get caught up in misunderstanding God and therefore seeking him in a sort of empirical, scientific way. That's not going to work.
So I guess all the reasons people have given so far why God exists, like there's design, we have a mind, and there's order in the universe, those people must have been wrong because apparently you can't look at it scientifically.
First, the question of whether God exists is like the question of whether morality or moral facts, minds, or free will exists. It's a philosophical question. It's not a scientific one.
Even though he was supposed to be a being and not just an idea, and he's supposed to be someone who interacts with humanity.
Second, the narrator is confusing proof and evidence. You can have evidence to support a view without being able to prove the view is true. There is evidence for each of the different interpretations of quantum mechanics, or there's evidence for each of the models of the universe before the Big Bang. But all of these scientific interpretations and models, they can't all be true.
Evidence is true, but we also keep doing research and don't dig in and say that this is the only possibility and I'm going to dedicate my life to this one possibility.
Just anything that would make something more likely to be true, even if it's not proof. Your fingerprints in a friend's house is evidence that you stole something if your friend reported a theft. But it's not proof you did it, since there's other explanations for your fingerprints being there beyond you stealing something. But video footage of you taking the stolen item from your friend's house is stronger evidence because it's harder to explain away. So when it comes to God, strong evidence for God would be something we observe, like the existence of causal chains, for example, that is not easily explained by something else, like a natural phenomenon, but can only be explained by a supernatural reality or a first cause.
So he went immediately from it's a philosophy question, not a science question, and then he brings up first cause. I would say that there's something scientific about what caused the Big Bang. And no, it doesn't have to be supernatural. We just don't know what it is yet. Again, not knowing what something is doesn't mean there was a supernatural reason for it.
So much in this life that we believe and know to be true, they don't come to us from science. It's the same with Jesus and faith and spirituality. They can be true even though they don't come to us from science. For example, when I come home and my wife says, "I love you," what do I do with that? Do I say to her, "Prove it"? Give me a scientific, repeatable, observable experiment that proves that you love me. See, that would be ridiculous because love belongs in a different metaphysical category. So I believe she loves me. I know she loves me, but it's based on trust and testimony and personal experience.
And what, sorry?
And personal experience.
Yeah, that's evidence, my friend. If your wife says, "I love you" every day, but also regularly makes a puking noise when you come close to her, constantly talks loudly on the phone about how dumb you are, spends every night out of the house, always forgets your birthday, never gets you a Christmas present, and ignored you when you speak, evidence would say something different, and you might stop taking her at her word. It may not be a scientific test, but your brain is gathering data to test the claim that she made. There are so many promises in the Bible about the nature of God, and we can observe whether or not those promises come true. God promises to take care of our needs, yet Christians die of starvation or don't have homes all the time. God says he'll answer all our prayers, yet so many go unanswered, including so many children dying of diseases that shouldn't even exist if there is a loving God. God promised an abundant life for those who follow him, but so many struggle to get by, and so many are alone. It's not just that he hasn't shown himself scientifically, but he also hasn't shown himself relationally. He also isn't showing us that he loves us.
Number one, God isn't physical. When people say that there isn't evidence for the existence of God, they're using this word evidence in a very narrow way. What they mean is that there isn't scientific evidence for God. And that depends on a very narrow understanding of this word science, which is to say the physical sciences.
He was physical when he was Jesus. He was physical when he came and walked around Babel. He has manifested himself physically at points throughout the Bible, so maybe he's not always physical, but he has been according to the book that they believe. But Brian here is a Catholic. He believes that bread and wine become God physically. They have holy water. They claim miracles. They have holy relics, but then claims that God isn't physical when it comes to testing that claim.
Well, if we set aside those very narrow definitions, then yes, you're right. If you say that there aren't any physical traces that can be empirically measured of God, yeah, you're right. Because God, who created the physical world, who created matter, is not physical. To insist on using a method that is designed to observe and interpret physical phenomenon in order to render a judgment about God, who is claimed to not be a physical phenomenon, is what's known logically as a category mistake.
The full presence of God is such that it overwhelms the mind. And of course it does. And that shouldn't be surprising that God, ipsum esse, the sheer act of being itself, the creator of all things, that in whom essence and existence coincide, is not going to be definable by our minds. It won't fit into our minds. So what does the mind want? Well, it wants the truth, and so it seeks it. It seeks it scientifically, psychologically, it seeks it through literature, it seeks it through philosophy. That's the beauty of the mind. I'd be asking people not to close their minds, but to keep opening their minds. I love the sciences, but I don't like scientism. which is the reduction of all knowledge to the scientific form of knowledge.
But if there was scientific evidence for God, then these people wouldn't need to make this argument. They wouldn't need to say that God can't be tested by science or that we can know things without scientific evidence. So at least these Christians will admit that there is no scientific basis for their faith, which is fine. But then you have to understand why people don't believe in God. Because again, the God of the Bible isn't a concept, it's a being.
Like, imagine if God could send you an email with an equation that proves exactly who and what he is.
It's the email. What, the email.
Do you think any of us could make sense of that equation? Of course not. God, in order to be God, must be higher than us. But anything that is beneath our ability to understand is not higher than us, it is beneath us, and therefore could not be God. So to insist that God be proven to us like this is to insist on a contradiction. It seems like we want a God who is sufficiently great enough that we can call it God or him God and worship him, but we also want a God who is sufficiently easy enough to understand so that it doesn't require faith to believe in him. Well, you can't have them both.
But he did send a message, right? According to Christians, he sent a message. There is a book that is a collection of books that was supposed to be sent to us from God or inspired by God, that is supposed to show us the nature of God, that is supposed to show us who God is. But then it gets to us and it's full of contradictions, it's full of scientific inaccuracies, and it shows an inconsistent description of who this God is. But by Brian's logic here, this book couldn't be the Word of God. And he shouldn't be a Christian because God wouldn't send a message because we wouldn't understand it?
I'm confused.
This version of God that he is describing would know that the Bible wouldn't work and he wouldn't send it. The God he is describing isn't all-powerful because he can't figure out how to communicate a message to his people that they would understand.
It's safe to say you're a bit of an expert on birds, yes?
I believe you're correct.
And you would understand this Pocono swallow quite well, wouldn't you?
Yes, I do.
Then please ask it if it attacked Liam!
Ask if... What?
So even if this version of God he's describing does exist, why should we care? This is just a cop-out. This is just a misdirect.
That's a misdirection!
This is just an admission that there is no good reason to believe in the God of the Bible, so we move the goalposts, we shift the focus. But if you believe the Bible, it seems like he was active for a while until the Bible was finished being written, and then he's been silent. And he only showed up in that one small part of the world.
The question, for those who couldn't hear it, he points out that in the Middle East, and particularly in the Jewish tradition, there have been prophets sent by God to communicate his message to mankind. Why aren't there similar prophets sent by God in China or Latin America or some place of that sort? And I would answer the question from a biblical perspective in the following way. The New Testament says that God has both a general revelation of himself, which is available to all mankind, no matter where and when they live, and then there's a special revelation of God, which he has made to Israel and through that tradition culminating in the person of Jesus of Nazareth. God's general revelation to all mankind is through nature and conscience. What comes to expression in the cosmological and moral arguments that I've discussed today, so that all persons everywhere at any time in history can know that there's a creator God of the universe and they can sense their moral responsibility to this person or this being. And that general revelation is available everywhere. But God, through his special revelation of Israel, has sought to reveal himself in such a way, culminating in the person of Jesus, that this message will eventually then be proclaimed throughout the world and will be made available to all persons. But by the very nature of a historical revelation, this is a process that begins at a particular geographical locale and time and then spreads throughout.
But then why are so many religions so drastically different? you would have at least expect them to have similar ideas, like maybe there's one God or three gods in one. You'd think that maybe they'd have the same rules about what is right and wrong. But we get such a wide spectrum of beliefs, to the point that you'd have to conclude that nobody is getting any revelation, or that the devil is blocking that revelation, which only says that the devil is stronger than God, or at the very least they shouldn't claim that everyone gets general revelation because they don't. If God did reveal himself to people, when we discover new lands and new peoples, we shouldn't have to tell them about our beliefs because they would already share them. Why would God instead have his story spread in a way that is indistinguishable from the way a rumor spreads? And the obvious question there is, why doesn't God speak to people now? And I know some of you will say he does speak to people. People hear from God all the time. Every Christian I know thinks God talks to them. I thought God talked to me. But unfortunately, God seems to just tell people what they want to hear. And there's a lot of contradictory things that he says to different people, which is one of the reasons there are so many different religions and so many denominations. Or if you ever went to Bible college, you probably knew someone who was clearly told by God which classmate he would marry. But then God didn't tell her that, or God told her it would be somebody else. And if God was speaking to people, that should be something we could test.
So then the question is, if there is a God, what would be the best way to reveal himself so that you and I could know him? Well, how would you do it?
And he goes on to give a couple scenarios, like revealing himself from the sky, or making signs and wonders in the sky, or revealing himself to everyone individually, and then making arguments for why each of these wouldn't work. But why would we have to decide how God would reveal himself? If God wants us to believe in him, and he wants a relationship with us, wouldn't he know the best way to reveal himself?
I'm sure you could very easily just make everyone know you by infusing yourself into their brains, which means no freedom for us. But you can't force a relationship. Who does that? I mean, would you rather your spouse choose you out of their own, free choice? Or because you somehow altered their mind and will?
But that's the answer that many people give, free will. God wants us to choose him on our own, and if he clearly revealed himself to everyone, we couldn't do that because we wouldn't choose to believe. Then why argue about his existence at all? Why do apologists even exist then? Why make arguments from design or fine-tuning or Kalam's cosmological argument at all? If God doesn't want people to believe based on evidence because of free will, then what's the point of making arguments for his existence?
Beginning with the fact that even if God did directly appear to and speak with every person on earth, not everyone would believe in him. After all, God revealed himself to mankind in the first century as Jesus of Nazareth, speaking like no man ever spoke and working all manner of miracles, including walking on water, healing the blind, and reattaching severed body parts with the touch of his hand. Even though Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead and came back from the dead himself, many still did not believe in him. They rejected him despite the fact that he, God, appeared to them face to face.
So it's not the free will thing? Yeah, it's true. Not everyone believes verifiable facts. Look how many people are vaccine hesitant, or don't believe in evolution, or think the American 2020 election was rigged. But just because some people won't believe verifiable facts doesn't mean we should all give up on learning facts, learning how things work. That doesn't mean we should all have to live in the dark.
Or you could just become one of them. Cross over into their time and space, their history, and take on all those little things that make us human. Which one of these do you think would be the best way to reveal yourself?
So we sent a messenger in the form of his son to spread the message to the world. His son didn't write anything down. His story was told in at least 4 contradictory ways. His followers have been arguing about what his message was for nearly 2,000 years, oftentimes using violence to decide what the right answer is. But the all-powerful God who knows everything, the God of the universe, thought that this was the best way to get his word out there. But here's the thing. Maybe a God exists. I doubt it, but maybe. Or maybe it was the universe burping monster. Maybe we all live in a simulation. Maybe we're all in a wizard's dream. Maybe there's a God, but he's super shy and will punish anyone who believes in him. Maybe it is the invisible unicorns that keep moving your keys. But we can't live our lives afraid of the maybes. There are so many different ideas of who God is or who the gods are. Every religion has schisms and disagreements. I think it's fair to say that if there is a God, no one knows what its deal is. If there is a God, it doesn't care if we know about it. Live your life in a way where you leave this world a little better than when you arrived. Find opportunities to make a difference. Love the ones you love. If God is going to punish you for any of that, then he's going to have to go through me. Hey, everybody, thank you so much for making it this far. If you know somebody who might benefit from it, send it their way. I love you all. You're the best.
Work, Sky Moon.